And joining us now on the line from New York, New York, Daniel Rosen, a fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Daniel, good to have you on the line from the Big Apple tonight. How are you?
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me on the show.
Pleased to have you on. Let's really do an Economics 101 as we start with this tonight. The Chinese are being accused of manipulating their currency. What does that actually mean, to be a currency manipulator?
Well, it means different things to different people. For purposes of the debate going on about the Chinese currency, what it means is this, that a government is intervening in markets to buy or sell its currencies or somebody else's in order to arrive at a particular value for its currency. Not just to set that value, but to achieve some other objective. And the objective being suggested here is that China is trying to run a big trade surplus with the rest of the world and is setting the value of its currency lower in order to try to achieve that. So actually a lot of countries intervene in currency markets. They have what's called a currency board to maintain a pegged rate. We call it pegged rate. Hong Kong does that, for example. Chile does it. We don't call them manipulators because day in, day out, year in, year out, they don't run giant external trade surpluses. And so they're not intervening to achieve that end. So we talk about China manipulating.
Yeah, the fact that the Chinese are running such huge trade imbalances with the rest of the world in their favor, of course, that's why the allegation of being currency manipulators coming forward. Is that right?
That's part of the story here. It's not just manipulating the value, it's manipulating the value to some end, and the end is to run a trade surplus.
Okay, that's the allegation. Do you believe it's true?
Well, it's true that China is intervening to set the level of its currency, and it's also true that for the past 5 or 6 years, China has run a giant external trade surplus with the rest of the world. And note that I'm saying the rest of the world. The fact that the U.S. and China have a trade imbalance is less important to us in economics than the fact that China has a giant global trade surplus. So that's incontrovertible. And also the size of it, the magnitude is incontrovertible. It's way larger than anybody thinks is a reasonable size for one nation's trade surplus to be. The currency clearly is playing a role in that. Estimates are all over the map. Some people think maybe just 5 or 10% undervalued against the dollar. Some people think as high as 40% undervalued against the dollar. Certainly is somewhat undervalued. That's probably playing some role in leading to these big external surpluses for China, but it certainly doesn't explain.
It all starts here, in a factory in China, workers producing stuff for Americans to buy. When these products get shipped to the United States, somebody pays this factory, an American businessman, and of course he would pay in his country's currency, the US dollar, for the goods. So if we follow the money, US dollars go to a factory owner in China. That's useless currency for him. The Chinese owner needs to change that money into renminbi in order to pay for labor, electricity, any of the costs needed to run a factory. So he goes to the bank. If you imagine Chinese businessmen across the country running to the banks to buy renminbi, then the price of the renminbi should go up. But it doesn't, because the government pumps more renminbi into the system to keep its price down. That is where the U.S. says
the Asia-Europe meeting in Brussels, Eurozone finance ministers met with Chinese officials over the value of China's currency. Officials from several countries have been putting pressure on Chinese officials to allow the yuan to rise. They say the undervalued currency affects global exchange rates and gives Chinese exporters an unfair trade advantage.
European Union officials and Chinese authorities remain divided over the value of the yuan. Discussion on the sidelines of the Asian-European Union Summit, or ASEM, on Tuesday only reaffirmed the divide. While the currencies of most countries float freely on world markets, the Chinese regime only allows the yuan to float within a very small range. Many economists say the yuan is undervalued by as much as 30%. This gives Chinese exports what many feel is an artificially low price and an unfair advantage on the world stage.
Around the world, for the right reasons, expect that the value of the Chinese currency is going to rise against the dollar. Meanwhile, the Chinese property sector has been growing by 30, 40, 50% a year in value in many of China's major cities. Interest rates are extraordinarily low in the West, especially in the United States. Put these things together, and people are finding ways to move money hundreds of millions, billions and billions of dollars into China every quarter. That's adding to the money supply in China. And that contributes to inflationary conditions in China. When you have more and more money piling up in an economy, the price level rises. You have the same amount of product available in stores, and you have billions and billions more dollars. What that naturally does is increase the bidding that people do for the products that are available, to try to simplify things a bit. And that's what contributes to inflation. So this, what we call carry trade or hot money flow into China, as a result of this looming expectation that it's just a matter of time here before China has to make an adjustment, is aggravating the inflation picture, adding to some overheating in China, and giving them a very big domestic macro reason to go ahead and start appreciating the
Chairman of the Eurozone finance ministers Jean-Claude Juncker spoke about the issue at a press conference in Brussels on Tuesday.
China's real effective exchange rate remains undervalued and is thus contributing to misaligned global exchange rate configurations. We welcomed the Chinese decision of the 19th of June this year to increase the flexibility of the Chinese currency exchange rate, although the potential of these decisions has not been sufficiently exploited.
Juncker said Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao told him that Eurozone officials raising the issue of the yuan came as no surprise, but that Chinese officials did not share Europe's view. United States President Barack Obama has also criticized the Chinese regime over the value of the yuan. He said in an interview with CNBC television that China's leaders haven't done, quote, everything they said would be done, referring to the regime's pledge to allow the yuan to rise.
U.S. President Barack Obama said the Chinese currency was undervalued, and while he had no timetable for China to move toward a more flexible exchange rate regime, he believed it was in their own best interests.
I think China rightly sees the issue of currency as a sovereign issue. I think they are resistant to international pressure when it comes to them making decisions about their currency policy and monetary policy. But it is my belief that it is actually in China's interest.
It's often portrayed as though this is the U.S. putting pressure on China, and if China strengthens the renminbi, it's good for the United States and it's bad for China. But in fact, moving towards a more flexible exchange rate and a stronger renminbi could actually be good for China.
But any time a tightly controlled monetary policy needs changing, there will be a lot of pain involved. Pain a Chinese leadership concerned with stability is hesitant to inflict. So up to now, the strategy has simply been one of delay. But both the Chinese and Americans know something must budge.
What do you think they're going to do, and when do you think they're going to do it?
So that's the trillion-dollar question of the moment.
Yes.
Everything taken together, we would expect them to, at day one, make a move something like 3%, 4%, 5% against the U.S. dollar, probably, although they say that they're setting their currency rate against a basket of currencies and not just the dollar, but it has just been the dollar for some time. But that's not all. The day after that, and from there forth, they're going to widen the trading band so that markets, at the end of each day, can continue to move the currency a little bit so that we don't have to always be waiting for the next big shoe to drop, but instead start to let the market decide whether the renminbi needs to be slowly moving in one direction or the other, and for the foreseeable future, it'll be in the direction of appreciation, meaning worth more against the U.S. dollar and other Western currencies.
Understood. Dan Rosen, thanks so much for your help on this complicated, but not so much anymore story. Thanks to you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
Obama met with Chinese President Hu Jintao on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit. Hu told Obama China won't be pushed on currency reform, but Hu also made clear that Beijing was committed to change without indicating when it might happen.
China is going to have to shift away from an economy that is solely oriented on exports, and it's going to have to start shifting towards an economy that is emphasizing domestic consumption and production, and is preventing bubbles from building up within the economy. And all of that will be facilitated with a more market-oriented currency approach. So I don't have a timetable, but it is my hope that China will make a decision that ultimately will be in their best interest.